Hi, I'm Kyle Reed, and in this video I'd like to take a look at a couple of lenses that are comparable in utility, although not price. The Red Pro Zoom 17 to 50mm T2.9 and the much more expensive Angenieux 16 to 42mm T2.8. The test footage in this video was captured on a Red Scarlet, shooting 4K, the 6:1 compression ratio at 800 ISO. I tested both these lenses for a number of aesthetic qualities that a cinematographer would look for when choosing a lens. And these qualities are resolution, perspective, color and contrast, flaring, bokeh, and lens breathing. I hope you find this video interesting, and before we get to it, I'd like to thank the media department in Pro HD Rentals in Burbank, California for providing the camera, lenses, lighting, and studio space for this shoot. To test the resolving power of each lens, I used a Schneider Optics resolution chart, and I chose the camera to chart distance to provide for 100 times focal reduction. And you get this number basically by taking the lens focal length in millimeters, converting it to inches, and multiplying that number by 100. And that's the distance that you set up the camera from the chart. And you do this so that despite changing focal lengths, you can keep the chart effectively the same size in the frame. So let's have a look. So with this test, I found that the Angenieux did perform better than the Red throughout all focal lengths and all apertures, even providing a crisp image all the way wide open. The Red did sharpen up and do admirably once stopped down to like a 5.6. And the sweet spot for this lens is about a 5.6 to 8 in terms of sharpness. The Angenieux does sharpen up from wide open, and its really sweetest spots around a 4 to an 8. To delve into the unique color and contrast of each lens, I shot a Macbeth chip chart, and I exposed this chart at key, which was a T4, and I lit the chart with daylight balanced Kino flow tubes and set the camera's white balance to 5600 degrees Kelvin with no tint adjustment. In this test, I did notice some differences between both lenses, and I found that the Red lens had a bit more contrasty, gutsy image that pushed a little colder to me, and the Angenieux provided a little bit lower contrast, more highly saturated image with sort of a more balanced, if not a little bit more warm edge. And in addition to that, I did find that the Red lens exposed a little darker at the same aperture marking than the Angenieux. The way a lens handles flares is pretty unique to each lens. And in this test, it was pretty simple. I just took an LED flashlight and passed it across my face from edge to edge of the lens to get an idea of the unique flare characteristics of each lens. And if you look at my face in this test, you can see the amount of lifting in the blacks that occurs when I'm directly in the lens with the flashlight. I did find something really interesting in this test, and although both tests were initially performed for either lens at the same shutter speed and frame rate, which was 24 frames a second and at a 48th of a second of a shutter, the Red lens, when flared directly, had some significant rolling shutter artifacts that you'll notice. I then shifted the shutter speed of the Red lens test to a 60th of a second, and those characteristic rolling shutter artifacts disappeared. This isn't something I've seen before, and it's really interesting. To me, this test really showed off the unique aesthetic differences between both lenses. While the Red was much better at suppressing flaring, the Angenieux gave like a very aesthetic and bold type of flaring. Both are really interesting, and either one can be appropriate. So I wanted to see how the out of focus area, or the bokeh, of each lens compared. So this was a really simple test where I just shot a string of Christmas lights and racked from sharp focus to a minimum focus of about 2 feet. I did these tests from wide open down to T16 again. This test was really interesting to me. Very similar to the flare test, I saw a lot of aesthetic differences between the two lenses. Wide open, they both had a very round bokeh that was very pleasing. And stop down, I felt like the red had a little bit more of a round bokeh compared to the Angenieux. In addition to that, the red also had a pretty even and flat bokeh across the lens from edge to edge of frame, while the Angenieux had some distortion that changed the shape of the bokeh at the edges of the lens and went from round to almost like a teardrop shape. So to look at the perspective of each lens along the focal range, I shot from widest to longest on each lens while framing a mannequin in close-up. I think it's apparent through this test that the red lens, given the same focal length as the Angenieux, represented a flatter perspective, while the Angenieux gave a greater sense of sort of depth in dimensionality. Lens breathing is typically considered a negative artifact of lens construction and is usually more pronounced on zoom lenses than in primes. So I wanted to see if there was any breathing present in either of these lenses. So I set up each camera in front of a set with some depth to it, then racked from close focus to far focus to see if there was any unwanted magnification of the image while racking. I think it's pretty obvious in this test that while the Angenieux has very little to no lens breathing whatsoever, the red does have some apparent image magnification while racking focus. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope these tests allow you to draw your own conclusions about each of these lenses, as well as just gives you an idea of how large an effect choice of lens has on your image making. And again, I'd like to thank the media department and Pro HD Rentals in Burbank, California for all the help.